Hey friends, it's a very windy afternoon in Singapore, and I don't know if you can hear like the wind kind of pushing through my windows, but if you hear it, you hear it. It's part of what's entertaining about doing a thing very often is that you start to catch all of these little idiosyncrasies, little strange random things that happen. Anyway, today I want to talk about cultural institutions and something more broad than that. I mean, there's a lot of ways to approach it. I think I also think about it in very simple terms. It's like, why don't things endure? And why don't we study how things endure? I'm sure there are people who do that and whose job is to, figure out what works and what doesn't work and how do things stick around. What do I mean by things? I'm talking about businesses is one thing. I'm thinking about like bars and music venues, and so that was stuff. Music venues in particular is something I was passionate about as a teenager. When I was a teenager, I discovered music, local music, live performed music. I thought it was amazing. I made some lovely friends. It saved me in some ways, to experience that level of emotional expression, integrity, sharing, communion. It was like my church in a sense, right? And I wanted to share more of that with more people. I found it to be a very healing experience. I just found it made me happy to be alive, to be a musician, playing music with other people and participating in other people's music, songwriting. It was so earnest and loving, and there were, negative elements as well. There was like drama and all that stuff, which I've written a draft of a novel about it, and one day I'll edit it and publish it. But anyway, a thing that I witnessed is that there would be music venues and there would be music studios, where musicians would go to practice at the studios, at these jamming sites, like you rent it by the hour. And then there would be places that, music venues, where people would go to play live music and people would attend and they would buy tickets. And sometimes it's like a bar kind of place where they sell drinks to try and make money. And the economics of it is such that, first of all, most of the people who pay to watch local music, they're like students, kids, right? So they don't have a lot of money, so they can't spend a lot of money. They can't really afford more than $10-$20 for entry. They don't buy a lot of drinks, so, and like very often if they're gonna get drunk, they would get drunk beforehand, or they would sneak in their own drinks, that kind of thing. And so venue owners, bar owners, they are understandably kind of not cool with the whole thing. And they found, one of my favorite local music venues, like a kind of trashy place, it eventually ran out of money or whatever and shut down. And in its place was a KTV, like a karaoke place, where, it's one of those places where I imagine like rich old businessmen would go, and there are like hostesses, and they would spend a lot of money on like big bottles of alcohol, whiskey, brandy, XO, whatever. And it's just witnessing that has been, it's kind of a reality check, I guess, just to understand how the world works. But still, I've never given up. I've always believed that it is possible, because at the core of it, the feeling, the expression, the sense of communion is so valuable. It's what people are looking for all the time. So I'm unshaken in my conviction that people undervalue art, right? Like at the broadest, in the broadest sense, like just globally, people continue to undervalue art. It's what gets you through the roughest times in your life, right? After your divorce, after your parents die, but also just day to day, listening to music on your commute on the way to work. And I am trying to figure out, how do we create environments and contexts where art is allowed to flourish and artists don't have to be sacrificing so much just to do their thing, right? And I think the internet has really changed things for us in a wonderful way, which is that, like, you don't necessarily need to have a venue anymore, like a fixed venue. Although it is nice to have fixed venues, and I think one of the end goals is that we should want fixed venues that last a very long time. And I think, in Singapore's context, I feel that it's so tragic how there have been certain venues that organically crop up, become these little cultural venues of like, they're like nascent cultural institutions, But they eventually run out of money, and rent keeps going up because Singapore is a very expensive place to live. And so eventually, like, there was this place called the Pigeonhole, which is like a cafe that would sometimes have like live performances and stuff like that. And when they ran out of money, they did like a Facebook post, and they needed like $15,000, and they raised like $10,000, which is, like $5,000 to save culture, right? Like, if I were in the government, I would try to, if there's just so many, I don't know where to begin. Like, at that time, I didn't have the audience that I have now on Twitter or such. But I wonder if today, with my current Twitter following, could I convince 5,000 people to chip in $1 to save an arts venue? And it's people lack the imagination to see the long-term value of cultural institutions like that. Like, in New York, they have, and I'm sure if you talk to New Yorkers, they will have their own complaints about what's going on. But I have a idealized fantasy image of New York in my head because of all the stories they put out. So it's your fault. Right. But yeah, they have all these legendary bookstores and comedy clubs and Broadway and all these things where these things have lasted long enough that they develop a mythos, and they just become things that people aspire to. They almost become like religious sites, and religious sites that are really, really old, people understand that there's a spirituality to the age of the thing itself. Like, a thing that has stuck around for very long has a certain kind of, even if it's just fictional, right? If it's people project their fantasies or whatever, like, old ancient ruins have a certain energy about them that I don't know if it's objective to the objects themselves, but just the knowledge that these things have been really around for really, really long, and they're just really, really old. I think there's a passage in some of Da Vinci's journals where he goes into like a cave, and he finds like the skeleton of a whale, and it's probably really old, and he has like a slightly existential moment. He's like reflecting on, oh whale, how long you have been here, how many hundreds of years, how ages of man have come and gone, and like there's just a power to the old things. And in our culture broadly, in pop culture, we don't recognize the value of longevity and of things sticking around, and of things I don't see many people aspiring to be great elders and to create lasting things that last decades. People I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people like on my radar who, like, they want to start a startup and grow really fast and get funding and make a lot of money and then cash out and retire, and then what? And then like, there's some like, you feel like you've made it, but then what have you made? And like, if your company subsequently goes to shit, what's the point? Like, why not just build something lasting and good to begin with? Like, that's the dream, right? I feel like so much of the ennui and just the dislocation, the sense of listlessness and frustration in the world is that things don't last. Things just everything's ephemeral, everything's passing, everything's and I don't want to make this one of those stupid lectures about kids these days. I think I'm sure there are kids who want things that last, right? So I want to focus on them. I want to focus on the people who want to build things that last and maybe don't quite know what to do and what to. So what do you do? Like, okay, like, I want to end this in 10 minutes, but so what do you do once you understand this, realize this? I think, okay, so you should work backwards from wanting to be a person who plays long games. And like, a simple way you can do that is have a blog and or a website or whatever, and decide to keep it alive for 50 years. And have a journal and intend to journal for 50 years, like once a month for 50 years. There will be value in that you cannot even begin to imagine. And yeah, it's the archivists and the historians and the librarians of the world, they get it. And I wish they had more cultural influence, and part of the work I'm trying to do is trying to give these people more cultural influence, and to just build things that last, because it's these things that last that create real value that sometimes it takes 20-30 years to pay off, and we have to develop that kind of patience. I've always wanted this, and I'm trying to find other people who want it, and I believe that if you have enough people who are playing long games, who are connected to each other, we will make these things happen. And I'll go into more detail in subsequent videos. Done.